Hello, everybody. My name is Hiiragi and welcome back to Scary Stories with Hiiragi. So, today I'm going to be listening to a YouTube channel that focuses on telling scary stories, which is called Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. I will post a link to this video I'm going to be watching slash commenting on, which is called 5 Scary Stories to Keep You Up All Night, in the description below so you can find it and check out the YouTube channel yourself. I'm interested to see what a professional, scary storyteller slash podcaster sounds like. So, let's get started.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
It's a little loud.
When I was a boy, I lived with my mother in an old house in Georgia. It was small and most parts of it were fairly worn, but the asking price was cheap and we needed a home. It wasn't all that bad though. The place had a pretty large backyard and acres of woodland behind it. On one particularly hot summer day, I was sitting inside playing with my dog Marley, as my mother was leaving for work and discussing the usual guidelines to the babysitter. "I'll be back around 11, I remember her saying. "Make sure he's in bed by 10. The babysitter nodded and smiled as my mother called goodbye to me and shut the door. Now, it was just me, Marley, and the babysitter from down the street. "I'm going to run a couple of errands," said the babysitter, to which I nodded without looking up. I suppose here is where I mention this babysitter was an asshole. After my mother would leave for work, she would politely excuse herself from the house, returning just in time to collect her pay. I never complained, however. I wasn't ever afraid of being alone, and what kid doesn't like having no rules for a while? I spent most of the day playing Game Boy or chasing Marley around the house. When the sun fell, it came time for my favorite summer activity, catching fireflies. I couldn't tell you why, but I was just so fascinated by fireflies and liked to keep them as pets. I grabbed an old mason jar from under the sink and left through the squeaky screen door to the back porch, Marley following at my heels. I was greeted by the overwhelming sounds of insects buzzing all around the backyard. I walked down the wooden steps of the deck and began my search for fireflies. I looked for the faint glowing lights for what felt like hours, shuffling through the grass in the warm night air. Suddenly I saw it, the biggest firefly I'd ever seen, blinking around the old rusted chain-link fence in the very back. With jar in hand, I whipped after it, Marley barking after me. I had soon made it to the fence when the firefly began to retreat into the woods. I wasn't about to go back empty-handed, so I climbed over the fence with a bit of a struggle and into the woods. Marley whined on the other side as I walked past old mossy trunks, leaves crunching under my feet as I went, following the glowing yellow light. The woods felt like I had stepped into another world. The trees were enormously tall, and the leaves atop shrouded any moonlight from entering. Just as I was beginning to feel I had gone too far, I looked back to find the shining porch lights of my house, but I could not see any trace of them. I had been engulfed by the woods. I couldn't hear the buzzing of insects anymore. It was silent now. I looked forward again to find the firefly drawing closer. I needed to catch it now, if only to use it as a light to find my way back. I swooped at it with my jar and caught air. Startled, the firefly began to float upwards, blinking its yellow light as it went. It kept going higher and higher out of my reach, and I followed it with my eyes. It drifted up the high timbers, and suddenly I saw everything. Bodies. Hundreds of twisted bodies, men and women,
Ew.
boys and girls, strung up like puppets in the branches, illuminated only by the light of the firefly. I couldn't move. possessed by fear. I could hear everything. The creaking of the ropes, the moaning of the old trees, and the footsteps close by. I ducked behind a tree, trying to quiet my harsh gasping. I had gone too far, I thought, and now I was going to live up there as another puppet. I didn't know what to do, whether to run or wait, but the footsteps were growing closer. It knows I'm here, I thought. There was no way it couldn't have heard me coming. Mustering all my courage, I shoved off the tree and bolted toward the direction I came, whipping up leaves as I went. I could hear it giving me chase from behind, its feet pounding the earth rhythmically as it went. I ran faster than I ever had in my life. I couldn't stop the tears from streaming as the wind slapped against my face. I hadn't even said goodbye to my mother when she left. As I hoped, the lights of the back porch were shining through the dark ahead of me. I could hear Marley barking, and I knew I would soon meet the old rusty fence. I remember thinking that climbing the fence would slow me down, but it was the only way. The trembling earth was growing closer, and the tip of my shoe caught a root, and I slipped, landing on my stomach.
Why does that
I
always
fumbled
happen?
over onto my back and began kicking away from the faint outline getting closer. I grabbed my mason jar and threw it as hard as I could into the black wood. I heard a thud and got to my feet. I met the fence and vaulted into my backyard. I screamed for my dog, and we both dashed up the deck and inside. Locking the doors, we rushed through. I sprinted upstairs to my room and took Miley with me, locking the door and pushing a chair against it. I collapsed onto my bed with the lights on, my mind racing. I checked the clock. 10:33. Relief washed over me. I was safe now, and soon Mom would be home. Perhaps it was the adrenaline leaving my body, because I suddenly grew very tired. I didn't want to sleep, but I couldn't fight it. I passed out on my bed with the lights on and Marley by my side. I awoke suddenly in the night to a pitch-black room. The covers were over me, so I guess Mom had gotten back and checked in on me. I was sweating under the warm comforter and turned on my other side. That's when I saw it. Her face, inches away from my own, with bone-white skin stretched tightly over its skull. Its tall, thin figure was hunched and bent over my bed. Its lidless eyes watched me, studying me. I wanted to recoil at the sight of it, but I couldn't move. Suddenly, everything changed. I woke up gasping. The lights were on in my room, and the chair was still pushed up against the door. Marley lifted his head and looked at me. My eyes drifted to the clock. 10:46. I heard the doorbell ring, and I ran downstairs to the front door, wrenching it open and following into my mother's arms, crying. And so now here I sit, 10 years later to the day, in a lobby crowded with people because I can't stand to be alone. I remember my mother traveling into the woods the next day against my wishes, only returning to say she didn't see anything. My brain had played tricks on me in the dead of night, she said. I didn't believe it at the time, and I don't now. There isn't a night that goes by that I don't think about it. That one night, I'll wake up to see that horrible face again. And this time, it won't be a dream. What scares me most is the thought that on that warm summer night 10 years ago, I was the one that got away. The pet it didn't get to keep.
Interesting. I love his voice. His voice is super just great at storytelling. Like, it's just I was zoned in the whole time. And the subtle like music, you can tell they chose a particular like track to kind of, flow easily in the background, which is really really nice. Yeah, that's terrifying. To think that you're just because I've had instances like that where I would go out in the summer. It was always with like my family, but we would be out, and I swear I like would see shadows in the woods, but I would never like go investigate or anything. And whenever like we would split up to go, catch our own fireflies or whatever, like I would be terrified of what was, out there like in the shadows, but I could never see anything. God, just imagining like getting in your bed and just falling asleep and then waking up and seeing this dark shadowy face over you. That's terrifying. All right. So I'm probably gonna do three. This playlist is pretty long, so I'm gonna try to keep it to about 30 to 40 minutes. So I'll probably do three of the five stories. So let's start the next one here.
One of my least favorite parts about being a middle school history teacher is the BS, living history assignments we give at the end of every school year. Kids are supposed to sit with their grandparents and videotape, voice record, or transcribe their oldest memories for posterity and for an easy way to bring up their GPA. I've been doing this for 17 years, and when I collected the projects this time around, I assumed they would be as dull, if not duller, than usual. This had not been a particularly bright class. So I went home, poured myself a glass of wine, and prepared for a long night of I only owned 2 pairs of pants when I was your age, and my brother got beat with a newspaper for hitting a baseball into the neighbor's yard. And of course, these projects were peppered with innocent, old person comments that were so horribly sexist and racist you just had to laugh. Now, I had a girl in my class whom I will call Olivia. She was quite pudgy, quiet, proved herself a consistent B student. I expected her project to be unremarkable as her. And perhaps that's why I was so profoundly disturbed by what I witnessed that night. Olivia had submitted 2 discs for some reason, so I began with the one marked Interview. My screen hiccuped twice before a grainy image of a living room came into view. The place was a hoarder's hell. Olivia was curled up in an armchair, clutching a notebook and looking like a scared animal. Across from her sat a man with a somber countenance, smoking a cigarette and staring at her expectantly. "Go ahead," a woman's voice whispered from behind the camera. Olivia's owlish eyes flashed toward the screen, then back to the man. "I'm here with my great-uncle Stephen," she began almost inaudibly. "He's going to tell us about his oldest memories from being in the army." Great-uncle Stephen looked like he'd rather be in a goddamn trench at the moment, but he waited patiently for her questions to begin. Not surprisingly, Olivia read verbatim from the suggested question sheet I'd handed out to the students. He answered her curtly. Once or twice I heard her mother whisper, "Speak up, Olivia," from behind the camera. Typical boring shit. So I was intrigued when Olivia set down the notebook and asked, "Did you like being in the army?" That was totally off script. Great-uncle Stephen emitted a chain-smoker's wheeze. "Nope. Glad to get out of my town, though." "Where'd you go?" "Balkans." "Uh-huh," she said. I doubted she knew what the Balkans were, and my suspicion was confirmed when she asked, "Was Bacchus very different from here?" "Yes." Mom cleared her throat from behind the camera, perhaps encouraging Great-uncle Stephen to be a little more forthcoming. But Olivia seemed genuinely interested. "Uncle Stephen," she asked, "what is your very worst memory from the army?" The old man crushed his cigarette in the ashtray, then slowly lifted himself out of his chair. "I'll be back," he mumbled. The camera cut off. When the screen flashed back on, everything was the same, except Great-uncle Stephen had several pieces of paper in plastic sleeves laid atop all the crap sitting on his coffee table. "What?" one he held in his hand. "I was a kid when I enlisted," he said, looking at Olivia. "Your brother's age," he told her. Olivia nodded. "I never saw combat. Both of my deployments were to cities in Eastern Europe that had been destroyed by civil wars. Everything was a mess. I felt like a janitor, for fuck's sake." Mom coughed. Great Uncle Stephen sighed and looked at his paper. "My unit was assigned to a school that had been obliterated by all the violence. Broken windows, caved-in rooms, and for some reason, the part that got to me most was that the school had been like this for years before we got there. No one had lifted a finger to fix it. I saw kids walk by it on their way to go beg for money or whatever shit they did." The camera dipped toward the floor as I heard Mom whispered harshly at Great Uncle Stephen. I couldn't make out what she was saying, but it wasn't hard to imagine. "Now, you want to hear this goddamn story or not?" I heard him bark in response. "Then you better let me tell it how I want." "Mom," Olivia chimed, "please stop interrupting." "Are you presenting this in front of the class?" "No, Mom, we're just handing it in to the teacher." "I'm sure he's heard the word shit before." Great Uncle Stephen contributed helpfully. I wasn't a he, as a matter of fact, but other than that, the statement was accurate. The camera was lifted, and after a couple of blurry focus adjustments, the shot was the same as before. "Oh, I'm talking too much anyway," he grumbled. He lifted the piece of paper in his hand close to his face. "In the basement, I found this letter. I didn't know what it said, but I had a buddy of mine translate it, so I'm going to read it now. And then I'll tell you what I saw in that basement." A chill ran down my spine. Mom zoomed in to Great Uncle Stephen and his letter. His palsied hands trembled as he held up the paper. This is what he read. "Dear Sir, I never loved my country. So many of these skirmishes are born from patriotism, a power struggle for the shards of a once great empire. But I do not care what name my home has on a map. This fighting is senseless, and I stay as far away from it as I can. It was not these attacks and disorganized violence that took the lives of my wife and child. It was illness. Mercifully, it happened quickly for the baby. Nadja suffered for longer. I watched in horror, knowing I could do nothing for them. My only solace is that I was there for them every step of the way. I stopped going to work one day, and no one came after me. I doubt they noticed I was gone. Since the school was simply across a field, visible from my window, it would have been easy to go for a few hours each day and come home quickly to care for them. But what was the point? All I did was clean floors. I was as useless to the world as I was to my family. I tried to take Nadja to the hospital, but the journey was too long and taxing. I brought her home, and she died that night. After Nadja and the baby were gone, well, I don't remember much. I didn't leave my hovel, barely ate and slept. Thought many times of taking my own life. Tempting though it was, I felt paralyzed by my own helplessness. The one thing that kept me sane was my radio. I never turned it off once, even though I didn't listen to the words being said. In fact, the channel I got the clearest was in English, I think, which I don't speak a lick of. But the voices, the music, and the true knowledge that life existed beyond this violent city sustained me. I have no idea how much time passed before I saw the light of day again. I was dizzy from hunger, so finding food was my priority. My radio came with me, of course. Since I first holed myself up, it has gone everywhere with me. It talks to me as I sleep and as I wake. I don't know what it's saying, but I know I would die without it. Once I had some water and food, it occurred to me that the only thing left to do was to go back to work, so I did. The following morning, I simply returned to the school where I was a janitor and got back to work. Nobody made a big deal out of it. Like I said, Nadja had been sick for a long time, and those who worked at the school knew it. I appreciate that no one had pestered me to come back to work during the hardest days of my life. The teachers never said much to me, but we smiled at each other in the halls, and that mutual respect was perhaps the reason I decided to come back at all. The place had gone to the dogs without me, so I simply grabbed my broom and rags from my closet and set to cleaning. Everyone is grateful to have me back, I know, and the best part is that nobody minds my radio. I bring it with me everywhere and keep the volume low enough not to disturb the students. No one has ever complained. In fact, I suspect they like it. The schoolhouse is not very big, but does require a lot of maintenance. The floors are always sticky and stained, so I spend most of my time mopping. Kids make messes. I guess that's why I'm still in business. Sometimes I have to move things around to make sure I get every spot on the floor beautiful and clean, but I take pride in that. And the repairs. The school always needs tune-ups here and there, and I'm happy to help. Some days I'm reconstructing a desk that broke as I whistle along with the radio. Other times I handle more serious structural issues. Days when I have to work like this, I feel truly instrumental. Like a cog in a larger machine. How could this school survive without me? It took me a long time, but I once again feel that I have purpose. There's a larder behind the school that is full of preserved foods. In lieu of payment, I'm allowed to take as much food as I need. That arrangement is fine. What would I do with money anyway? I used to bring the food back to my house, just one field away from the school. But when I started sleeping in the basement, no one seemed to notice. This school is special to me, and I cannot leave it unguarded. When I'm besieged with memories of my wife and baby, I turn up the volume on the radio to drown out such thoughts. It works for me every time, except this morning. Because this morning, I woke up to dead silence. I frantically examined the radio to see what had happened. I honestly cannot tell you how many days in a row I've been using it. Did it simply live out its life and die naturally? I've spent the entire day trying to fix it. Most of this time I've been crying. I've been losing my mind without it. I've given myself until sundown. If I cannot fix it by then, I'm going to take my life. I'm writing this because the sunlight is starting to die and I know what my fate shall be. I've thought about taking one last walk through the halls of my school, saying goodbye to the students and teachers. I know I will be missed, but I cannot bring myself to leave this room. I cannot go anywhere knowing that my radio is dead in here. There are no more tears in me. It feels now like I can't catch my breath. I vomited what little food I had in my stomach and I am growing dizzy again, like I did after Nadja died. I'm not long for this world. But before I take my life, I've closed the door to this room and stuck a chair beneath the handle. It's the only room in the basement and has a small casement that lets in just enough light for me to see what I'm doing. If anyone is kind enough to come looking for me, they should not be met by this gruesome sight. Perhaps they'll see the doors blocked, smell my rotting body, and simply forget I ever existed. But I've placed both my radio and this note outside the door. Kind sir, if you're reading this, I have one humble request. Please fix it. Save my radio. It did not deserve to die in its sleep, and I'm ashamed that I cannot revive it. Now, I'm ready to join Nadja and little Ludmilla in heaven. I hope this school can find another janitor who loves and cares for it the way I do. The hour is now. Do not forget my radio. Stanislav. When Mom zoomed back out, Olivia had tears in her eyes. Thank you for sharing.
Uncle Stephen," Mom said, her voice choked. "I think we have enough." "Wait," Olivia chirped. "He said there's more. What did you find?" Before Great Uncle Stephen could open his mouth, the image disappeared. My jaw dropped. Was that it? What did Great Uncle Stephen see? I promptly remembered there was a second disc. This one was unmarked, but I hoped it contained the rest of the interview. There was no video, only audio. The voice that started up was Olivia's. "Hi, Miss Garrity. I'm sorry about my mom, but she refused to record the rest of what my uncle was saying. But I asked him to continue and secretly recorded the story as a voice memo on my phone. I remembered you said earlier this year that history is written by the people who win wars." She sucked in a breath and commenced crying. "But everyone's history is important. Even if they are sad, pathetic people, and even if they never won a single thing in their lives. I haven't slept through the night since I finished this project, but you have to hear what my uncle has to say." There were tears in my eyes, too. The sincerity of her words was beautiful. I was also flattered that she remembered some trite phrase I threw around because it was what my history teacher said to me. Before I got too sappy over it, the audio began again. "Fine," came Mom's frustrated voice. "If you want to hear the rest of the story, fine. But this is not appropriate for a school project." "Let me finish," Great Uncle Stephen snapped. "If it's too much for you, help yourself to a snack in the kitchen. But Olivia wants to know what happened." I heard her mother mumble something and walk away. Olivia and her uncle were alone. I imagine her looking at him expectantly. "So did you find the radio, or did it get ruined when the school got blown up?" He rasped, and I heard the distinct click of a lighter. "That letter," he began slowly, "had a date on it." "What date?" she inquired hungrily. "It was dated 2 weeks before we started rebuilding the school." "Didn't you say the school had been destroyed like 2 years ago?" "Yes," replied Great Uncle Stephen. "It had been." There was a silence as I felt goosebumps on my arm. The images that came to my mind were almost too overwhelming to express, but Great Uncle Stephen put them into words effortlessly. Clearly, he had spent his whole life thinking about it. This man, this Stanislav, went to a vandalized, falling apart schoolhouse and cleaned up blood and rubble like it was spilled drinks and dust. He smiled at dead bodies in the hallway and believed they were smiling back at him because they liked his radio. He moved around corpses so he could sweep the ground around him. The roof was half collapsed, so when it rained it must have gotten soaking wet, but was so oblivious that he didn't even feel a thing. I could hear Olivia crying steadily. I found the larder he was talking about. It was all pickled, preserved food that probably tasted like shit. Most of the stuff was moldy. Did you see the dead body?" "Yes. Hanging from the ceiling, but still amazingly lifelike. He wasn't rotting away. This hadn't happened years ago." "Did he look peaceful?" she asked, a chord of desperation in her voice. "Couldn't tell you. The smell was rank, and his face was blue, and his eyes were bulging, like this." I imagined him demonstrating. "The radio?" Olivia wept. I heard Great Uncle Stephen take a long drag of his cigarette. "Is there, all right. and it was still on.
When I was a small child,
Huh. Okay, so the beginning of that was kind of boring, I feel like, but the end of that was super interesting. So this guy just keeps doing, his job after everything's been destroyed and he's just there like everything's, normal. Oh god. The radio wasn't broken at all, but it still worked. That's crazy. So it just makes you wonder how the radio got why couldn't he hear the radio? Um, you know, when right before he died, and why was that radio so important to him? I guess cuz it was the only thing he felt was living cuz everything else around him was dead. Huh. So he was hallucinating a lot. Um, but there's really just a lot of we don't really know exactly what happened. But he found the radio and apparently it was still working, so that's weird. Okay. So let's go on to the third and final story.
I was terrified of the dark. I still am, but back when I was around 6 years old, I couldn't go a full night without crying out for one of my parents to search beneath my bed or in my closet for whatever monster I thought was waiting to eat me. Even with a nightlight, I would still see dark shapes moving around the corners of the room or strange faces looking in on me from my bedroom window. My parents would do their best to console me, telling me that it was just a bad dream or a trick of the light. But in my young mind, I was positive that the second I fell asleep, the bad things would get me. Most of the time, I would just hide under the blankets until I became tired enough to stop worrying. But every now and then, I would become so panicked that I would run screaming into my parents' room, waking up my brother and sister in the process. After an ordeal like that, there would be no way anyone would be getting a full night's rest. Eventually, after one particularly traumatizing night, my parents had had enough. Unfortunately for them, they understood the futility in arguing with a 6-year-old and knew that they'd be unable to convince me to rid myself of childish fears through reason and logic. They had to be clever. It was my mother's idea to stitch together my little bedtime friend. She collected a large assortment of random pieces of fabric and her sewing machine and created what I would later refer to as Mr. Ickbar Bigglestein, or Ick for short. Ick was a sock monster, as my mother called him. He was made to keep me safe while I slept at night by scaring away all the other monsters. He was pretty damn creepy, I had to admit. Honestly, looking back on it all now, I'm still impressed that my mom could think of something so strange and disturbing looking. Ickbar had the stitched-together look of a Frankenstein gremlin. The big white button eyes and floppy cat ears. His little arms and legs were made from a pair of my sister's black and white striped socks, and half of his face, that was green, was made from one of my brother's tall football socks. His head could have been described as bulbous, and for his mouth, my mom attached a piece of white fabric and sewed in a zigzag pattern to shape a wide grin of sharp teeth. I loved him at once. From then on, Ick never left my side. So long as it was after dark, of course. Ick didn't like the sun and would get upset if I tried to bring him to school with me. But that was okay. I only needed him at night to keep away the boogeyman, which was what he was good at. So every night at bedtime, Ick would tell me where the monsters were hiding, and I would place him near the section of my room closest to the spookiness. If there was something in the closet, Ick would block the door. If there was a dark creature scratching at my window, it would be pressed up against the glass. If there was a big hairy beast under my bed, then under the bed it went. Sometimes the monsters weren't even in my room. Sometimes they would hide in my dreams, and Ikbar would have to come with me into my nightmares. It was fun bringing Ik into my dream world, as he and I would spend hours fighting off ghouls and demons. The best part was, in my dreams, Ik could talk to me for real. "How much do you love me?" he would ask. More than anything, I would always tell him. One night in a dream, after I had lost my first tooth, Ik asked me for a favor. "Can I have your tooth?" I asked him why. "To help me kill the bad things," he said. The next morning at breakfast, my mom asked where my tooth went. From what she told me, the tooth fairy didn't find it under my pillow. When I told her that I gave it to Ikbar, she just shrugged and went back to feeding my little sister. From then on, every time I lost a tooth, I would give it to Ik. He would always thank me, of course, and tell me that he loved me. Eventually, though, I ran out of baby teeth, and I was beginning to get a little too old to be still playing with dolls. So Ik just sat there on my bookshelf collecting dust, slowly fading away from my attention. Over time, the nightmares, however, became worse than ever. So bad that they even began to follow me to the waking world, terrorizing every dark corner or rustle in the bushes. After one particularly bad night, biking home from a friend's house where I swore a pack of rabid dogs were chasing me, I got home to find something strange waiting for me in my room. There, on my bed, standing fully upright in the soft glow of the moonlight from my window, was Ikbar. At first, I just thought my eyes were playing tricks on me again. They had been all evening, so I tried to flick on the lights. Another flick of the light switch, then another and another, with no change to the darkness. It was then that I started to get nervous. I backed away slowly toward the door behind me, my eyes never leaving the shape of Ik's silhouette. My hand awkwardly outstretched behind, reaching for the doorknob. I was just about to get my ass out of there when I heard the door slam itself shut, locking me into blackness. In nothing but shadows and silence, I stood frozen in place, not even breathing. For how long, I can't say, but after what felt like a lifetime of cold fear, I heard this shrill, familiar voice. "You stopped feeding me, so why should I protect you?" "Protect me from what?" "Let me show you." I blinked once, and everything changed. I wasn't in my bedroom anymore. I was somewhere else. It wasn't hell, but the comparison wasn't far off. It was some sort of forest, a horrible, nightmarish place, where partial embryonic abortions hung from the canopy, and the ground swarmed with carnivorous insects. A thick fog wafted through the air, and with it the stench of rotting meat, while chartreuse lightning flashed across the night sky. In the distance, I could hear the agonizing screams of something not quite human. My head throbbed like it was about to explode, the pain forcing out a river of tears. In my mind, I heard his voice again. "This is what your reality would become without me." I felt earth-shaking footsteps approaching fast. I'm the only one who can stop it. It was behind me now, huge and angry, hot breath across my back. "Bring me what I need, and I will." I woke up before I could turn around. The following day, I raided my parents' closet for my brother's baby teeth, giving them all to Ikbar. Almost immediately, the night terrors ceased, and I was, more or less, able to go on about my life as normal. From time to time, I would have to sneak into my little sister's room and snatch what was meant for the tooth fairy, or strangle one of the neighborhood cats and pry out its sharp little incisors. Anything to ward off the visions. Anything from a shark-tooth necklace to a cavity-ridden bicuspid. I also began to notice that Ik would move about my room whenever I left for any length of time. rearranging my stuff and hanging additional curtains. He was even beginning to look more lifelike somehow. In the right light, his teeth would glisten, and he was warm to the touch. As much as he creeped me out, I couldn't work up the courage to just destroy him, knowing perfectly well where that would leave me. So I went on collecting teeth for Ick throughout all of high school and college. The older I got, the more things I would learn to fear, and the more teeth Ick would need to keep me safe. I'm 22 years old now, with a decent job, my own apartment, and a set of dentures. It's been almost a month since Ick's last meal, and the horrors are starting to crowd around me once more. I took a detour through a parking garage after work tonight, found a man fumbling with his car keys. His teeth were stained yellow from a lifetime of cigarettes and coffee. Even still, I had to use a hammer to get out the molars. When I got back to my apartment, he was waiting for me, on the ceiling in the corner, 2 white eyes and a mouth of razors. "How much do you love me?" he asks. "More than anything," I reply, taking off my coat. "More than anything in the world."
Huh. So that's gross. He literally is just taking teeth from anything and anyone just to appease this, I don't know, spirit that is slowly maturing and becoming real. That's crazy. So, like, if he gives him enough teeth, will he become, like, actually fully real? And then what would he do? Would he, like, actually harm the kid? Or, which I guess is not a kid anymore. But would the spirit, like, I don't know, actually grow to become a demon that he swore he would, protect the child from? Or would he just continue doing what he was doing and not harm him at all? But obviously the kid now, as an adult, is harming other things and other people to get what, the spirit wants. So his, that's eventually going to become a problem. And, God, I'm trying to wrap my brain around it. That's just, like, really odd. That's the thing about these stories, too. Like, the other stories seem to have some sort of, like, finite kind of ending, where it was like, oh, like, the ones I read, it was like, oh, I could see where this is gonna either keep happening, or it's, that's the ending that's gonna happen, But it was like, these ones just are all just open-ended, like, wow, that just blows my mind. Okay, so these are definitely different kinds of stories, and I actually think I like the ones I read better, but I like the narration and I love, like, the background, the very subtle, like, background noise. They're very, very well done, and you could tell they were done by a professional. I think these are more of, like, I don't know if they're real or based on, like, true stories that someone has collected. It sounds to me like they kind of are. They're, like, less fabricated and more based on, true stories, because they're just so, like, lifelike. But it makes them odder because real life doesn't really have, an ending. It's just kind of, like, keeps going. Like, little things happen that are just spooky, and it just keeps going, and you don't know whether that's ever going to be resolved or not. But that's kind of how life is in general. Anyways, this has went on for a long time. This was a very interesting experience. I don't think I'll do another, like, listening to podcasts again, but I was interested to see what a professional podcast, scary story podcast looked like, and I wanted to show you guys, like, my reaction to it, and so you guys can see some, professionals at work. I actually do want to do another scary story reading, like I did with the last time, just finding stories off that app and reading them. So I will probably get started on that again. I'm not sure how long that'll be. I got some more Let's Plays I gotta get through, but we'll see. So thank you all, everybody, for tuning in, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!